He's on his way out, but the Dutch Prime Minister puts on the boxing gloves one more time as he heads to the G20 summit in Toronto. Hello and welcome to this exclusive interview with the Dutch Prime Minister Jan Peter Balkenende. Prime Minister, welcome to the programme. Later on we will be looking at exactly what went wrong during the June elections and asking you for your thoughts on that. But first of all, let's just look ahead to the upcoming summit. You're boarding the plane tomorrow to Toronto. And I wonder, as you head for this last international summit, whether you feel a bit nostalgic?
No, it's doing business and you have to work as always. And I can compare it a bit with our last meeting of European Council.
Last week in Brussels?
You could have asked the same question. And when I was there, of course, some people are saying maybe it's your last European Council meeting, but on the other hand, your business, you're representing the Netherlands, you are talking about the interests of Europe and the interests of the Netherlands, and you take actively part in all the discussions. And I think the same will be the case when we're in Toronto this weekend. And
it's very big discussions, of course, because the last time you met these other leaders was in Pittsburgh in the autumn. The world economy was on its knees. Europe is still very, very shaky. According to you, are things worse or better than they were then?
It's a difficult question because everything started a few years ago with the financial crisis. And it started in the United States. And then the question here in Europe is, will it hurt the European economies? And after that, it was not only a matter of the financial issue, it was also the economic reality. Everything was going down. We saw the increase of unemployment, a lot of uncertainty. And then we've seen many difficult issues. And so therefore we stimulated the economy, we helped the financial institutions. But now you can see some signs of recovery in the Far East, and I'm happy with that. Quite recently I was in the Far East, I was in China, in Shanghai, in Korea, and Japan and Singapore. And you can notice there a kind of self-confidence. Yeah. But when you're in Europe at the moment, and I understand the difficulty, we talk about the issue of Greece, we talk about the euro, we talk about countries like Spain and Portugal. So I think there are some positive elements, but there's also a lot of uncertainty.
And it's very, very fragile, of course.
That's the point.
And
that's the point.
President Barack Obama, I mean, you will have received one of his letters he sent out to all the European leaders this week saying, warning against the risks of what a lot of governments are doing, including the Dutch government now, which is massively cutting the state budget. And we see here, even in the Financial Times today, you know, Europe's hard sell for fiscal tightening, dilemma for G20 leaders. Are we, do you think, on a collision course here with the United States in terms of the approach?
Maybe it's good to go back to the earlier meetings of the G20. When we started, we said together, you have to stimulate the economy in the short run, but you have to work on the sound fiscal policy in the longer run. And we use the word exit strategy for that. That means that you're working to have a better situation as far as the state debt level is concerned, or the budget deficit and so on. Take for instance now the Netherlands. We have at this moment a budget deficit of about 6%. So that means that you are really stimulating the economy, because usually you cannot go above the level of the minus 3%. According to the European rules.
But on the other hand, you're also talking about cuts of nearly 30 billion euros in the budget.
But it's in the longer run.
In the longer run.
But we said if you want to have a balance on your budget, then you must work on savings of 18 billion euros, and then we talk about the year 2015.
But that essentially means, in the meantime, less money in the pockets of consumers. Therefore, the worries of President Obama that basically people are going to stop spending and we go into another recession.
But I don't think it's only a matter of stimulating the economy. It has to do predominantly with the confidence among consumers and producers. If a producer is starting to invest again, that is really helpful. And I must say the situation in all the countries are not the same. Take for instance the unemployment situation. In the Netherlands you have the lowest level of unemployment. So therefore that's not a reason to stimulate the economy. And that's what I always said. There are countries, then some elements of stimulating the economy might be the right way. But for a country like the Netherlands with such a low level of unemployment, I think you have to work on a better fiscal situation. And also I think we must only talk in terms of the short-term interest, because if you are just creating high budget deficits, that will mean that the state that will go up, and who has to pay for it? That means the younger generations. We have to be very careful about that.
It's going to be a very exciting summit, I'm sure, but first, Prime Minister, you'll have to allow us to look back a little bit on what have been very eventful 8 years for you. And we've just got a slight reminder here for you.
De kiezer heeft gesproken. En de uitkomst van deze verkiezingen is helder. Ik heb onze partijvoorzitter vanavond laten weten dat ik mijn partijleiderschap per direct neerleg.
Wie vindt dat ik wel op Harry Potter lijk?
Die VOC-mentaliteit. Over grenzen heen kijken. Dynamiek. Toch? Een samenleving waar sprake is van respect en waarin we samen vormgeven aan de toekomst van het land en niet één groep afschuiven. Dat is wat mij bezighoudt.
Wäre ein guter EU-Präsident gewesen und er war auch ein guter niederländischer Ministerpräsident. Nur sehen viele Niederländer das nicht.
Ja, ich werde ihn vermissen. Wir haben über viele Jahre sehr, sehr gut miteinander gearbeitet und ich glaube, dass Jan Peter Balkenende viel für Europa getan hat.
Tot ziens, Jan Peter.
I have to ask you about the night of your resignation. I mean, you were visibly moved, emotional. It must have been incredibly hard for you.
For me, but especially for my party. When you have such a loss of seats, that's a terrible event. And so I was thinking about my party, but also about the future of my own country. Because I think it's important that we have some stable parties. And as you know, the Christian Democrats always played a very important role in the quality of government.
You've been in power for 8 years, one of the longest serving prime ministers in Dutch history. Do you not feel somewhere that it was perhaps one election too many?
Well, it's a bit early already to evaluate the whole situation.
But I mean, you know the result of your party.
But the question that I've said many times to colleagues of you, when the party asks so clearly, do you want to do it again? Do you want to be again the first on the list? Do you want to be our candidate? Then you must have very good arguments to say no. And I must say, I always thought the job is not over because so many things are on our agenda. And that was the reason I was very motivated to do it. And I must say, despite the result of the elections, it has been a great campaign. I really liked it. I liked the debates. I liked the interviews. It was great to see people and to meet people in the country. But life goes on.
Life goes on, indeed. And we've got a question here actually from Stanford, Connecticut, from one of our listeners, Gea Passman. She says, you've been blamed for focusing too much on becoming the first EU president last autumn. That gave the impression that you were no longer interested in the Netherlands. Do you regret that?
Well, I do not agree with the question.
You do not agree?
No. Because,
but the media was full of it at the time.
But if I have to take account of everything what the media is saying, that
you never get anywhere.
Can threat a bit your political life. I think it's better to do your job. And as you know, when Herman van Rompuy became president, I said I'm standing behind you. We know each other already for more than 20 years, so I fully support him.
But the point is, it did leave the door open to all these discussions about who might be your possible successor, which was a dangerous thing to happen.
Yeah, but I must say that was more a discussion in the media than it was a discussion of myself. Because I know how it works internationally. And as I said, I like Herman van Rompuy. It's good that he has a job. And I've always been busy with talking about the interests of my country. And we have the freedom of opinion, freedom of speech, so people can say what they want.
You've spoken a little bit already in some interviews about your disappointments in the past 8 years. You've also mentioned, for instance, the EU referendum, where the Dutch voters voted against the EU constitution. But I wonder, though, in terms of you failing to convince the government that it was worthwhile extending the mission to Afghanistan, it soured relations badly with Washington.
It has to do with convincing our colleague, coalition partner, the PvdA, the Labour Party, to work together with us. And it has been a strange time because, of course, we took the decision to extend our stay for 2 years. But then we had, I think, a very good option, a training and transition mission. And I think that was really the right way because you could transfer your responsibilities to the Afghans. I think it would have been a great solution. And we spoke about that for 3 weeks, and suddenly it was all over.
Exploded.
And that's a pity. And I already said I think it's irresponsible behaviour, and I deeply regretted that it happened.
It does build up to an image of a more inward-looking Netherlands that we've seen really over the last years. I mean, increasing Euroscepticism from all the parties actually, including yours, a smaller role now within NATO. And of course, I mean, we just saw in the clip now you criticising Geert Wilders, an inward-looking populist party leader, if ever there was one. It's a trend, and a trend that perhaps you haven't been able to fight as convincingly as you might have wanted to.
I think we need the right analysis. When we talk about Dutch entrepreneurs, all the Dutch companies, they are they are looking to external affairs.
But that's always been the case.
Okay, but it's very important. We have a very active international business sector, international operating. When we talk about students or travelers, the non-governmental organizations, we have so many people with an international orientation. So that if you talk about the Netherlands, you also have to talk about them. And then, of course, you have the debate in our parliament. You refer to the no when we had the referendum. On the other hand, the Netherlands was one of the effective players to say we have to find a solution. We were very active in bringing forward new solutions for it. We said if we've had a referendum, it's important now to work with an amending treaty, and it worked out.
And the Lisbon Treaty,
and then we got a majority in Parliament for that. So I think if you talk about the Netherlands, you can see that the external orientation is still there. And I've always said our future as the Netherlands, that's a future in Europe. We are always talking about the good transatlantic relations. We talk about development cooperation, the Millennium Development Goals. When we talked about the climate issue, I worked together with Tony Blair. So I think there's much more to say than only the Geert Wilders voices and so on.
You just mentioned Tony Blair. You've obviously rubbed shoulders with lots of world leaders, most of them in fact. Is there anybody who you enjoy particularly at the end of a long summit or a meeting, kind of grabbing a beer with at the end of the day?
That's a bit difficult because there are so many good colleagues.
Well, there must have been one where you just thought, you know, this is a great person to be hanging out with.
Mentioning one name is always at the cost of another. But if you're talking about having a beer, then I can refer to Angela Merkel. She was here in the Netherlands and usually have these official visits. And then she said, can we go to, for example, a bar where you are from time to time? And then we went here to the square here in The Hague, and she had a glass of white wine and I had a glass of beer, and we enjoyed it both.
And she's able to have a laugh.
But also the fact that we are phoning with each other, we are sending SMS to each other, so that's a good symbol of good cooperation.
And things that you might miss, I mean, presumably there were lots of moments in the last 8 years where you thought, my goodness, enough of all this now. What are the kinds of things that you'll really be glad to kind of shake off? Oh,
that's very difficult. Because if you have the responsibility as Prime Minister, everything is part of your job. And then you have the good things, but also the difficult issues. When we talk about the difficult issues, that has always to do with the loss of lives. And that happened also when we talked about the tsunami some years ago. Now the plane crash in Tripoli in Libya. When we are losing lives in Afghanistan, these are the most sad events. And I met many family members. And I think these things are the most difficult ones when you're Prime Minister.
In terms of looking to the future, I'm sure you'll be very reserved if I ask you what are your plans, but can you give us one indication?
You have a very good question, and the fact that you're already
I'm not going to get
talking in terms of I'm very reserved means that I have to be very reserved in my answer.
Oh dear, well that's a very disappointment. But let me just ask you one last question if I may. The coalition talks are running aground right now. Just a hypothetical question. How difficult would it be, do you think, internationally, if Geert Wilders and his Freedom Party were to sit at the table of the Dutch government? We know what happened, for instance, with Austria when Jörg Haider was at the table and the country was completely boycotted.
I must say this is a really difficult question for me because I'm not sitting at the table of negotiations. It's my task now to finalize my job and to hand it over to the new Prime Minister. And at this moment we are in a complicated phase of finding solutions. Well, what happened during 1.5 weeks? One option came after the other. So I think it's very difficult. We're talking about Geert Wilders. I'm not talking about a coalition, but you know what I've said also when we had a campaign, that some of his remarks are very unwise. When you're blaming, for example, the Prime Minister of Turkey, I think it's a risky affair to talk in that way. Because it's always important that you can talk with each other, that you are treating other people in a respectful way. And I really could imagine that the chairman of the employees organization in the Netherlands, he was blaming Geert Wilders for his remarks.
A word of advice, perhaps, just before we let you go, to your successor. What would you say to the person succeeding you just to steal them for the years ahead?
The most important thing is you always must have a clear agenda. When you have really the conviction that you're doing the right things, you have to go on with that and do not take into account all the polls and so on. What's also very important, take care of the fact that you have very good international contacts, because you need it when you're Prime Minister of such an important country like the Netherlands.
All right, well, we look forward to seeing you in another international role, I'm sure, very soon. Thank you so much, Prime Minister, for being with us today. And thank you very much for joining us. And we hope to see you again very soon. Bye-bye for now.